Hello friends, very good morning to all of you. So we have completed authentication selector configuration in the PF17. Now we are jumping to the fragment configuration. So yeah, we'll discuss what is fragment and we'll try to create in the PingFederate lab environment, right? And then once we just jump to the PF19, that is authentication policy building, right? Then basically you'll really understand that what is the use of fragment, how fragment is basically helping you to administer the policies and also reducing the complexity, right? And how you can use that fragment in multiple places under policy, and yeah, to reduce the basically complexity and it will really help you to administer the policies also, right? So we can see that in the PF19, right? So let's begin and we can discuss on fragment. So by the definition, it basically says about that it just helps to administer the policy on an easy way, right? So it just reduces the complexity of policy. So if you remember that we just covered the APC, right, authentication policy contract. So there basically what we understand that it basically makes managing authentication flows much more simple, right? So basically we understand with example also in APC, right? Like we basically just we just see that request, right, where the requirement of the multi-factor authentication to be added, right? So we saw that we just need to go and define all the adapter in all the applications, right? The whatever the connection basically we created in PingFederate, right? And then we need to define the policy, update the policy basically. But if we are using the APC authentication policy contract, in that case we just need to update our policy, nothing else, right? Because it's already been there, like the same authentication policy contract we have already configured in all the applications, right, in all the connection in PingFederate. So we just need to go to the policy and just update that so that it can automatically trigger the multi-factor authentication, right? So we just discuss with an example, right, how APC is just helping you to manage the authentication flow much more simpler, right? So in similar way, fragment is also helping you to administer the policies on an easy way, right? So I'll just mention the terminology here, that administer the policies, right, in an easy way, right? So it basically reduce the complexity, and not only that, it basically just you can just I'll just give you I'll just show you something. Like, let me open the pencil. Okay, so for an example, like you have multiple policy. Okay, you have P1, you have P2. These are the policy basically you created in the inside PingFederate, right? You have P3, you have P4 for an example. Okay, now in all the policy basically you have the complete set of configuration, the logic build, right? That means like in one policy you are basically checking that whether user is coming from which network, and based on that you are taking a decision, right, like whether this authentication source or this authentication source, right? First of all, like you are checking the condition and then just making true false, right? In true you are just giving some authentication source, in failure you are just giving another one, right? Again in this case for failure, again it will just go for another set of thing, right? So it can become like a tree structure, right? So like if it passes also, then if you have some other like second factor authentication, so you need to give that. Again if it fail and pass, again you need to put that result, right? So it becomes little complex, right? So you just need to define entire thing under the policy, right? Same thing apply for P2 also, right? Maybe you are checking some other thing here, right? Maybe you are just defining here maybe a scope based authentication selector, right? So for that you are basically checking the condition, then you are just making true and false, right? So for true you are just adding some authentication sources, for failure you are just giving some else thing, right? And again you are just putting that okay, so if that comes, then again you are putting true false, like that. You understanding that what I'm trying to say? Basically it's going in a tree structure, right? So this policy looks little complex, right? Because you need to define complete thing. First you are simply checking that whether user is from internet, okay, or intranet, right, like that. So first you check this, right? Once you find that, so you have some configuration for this, and you have some configuration for this, right? For if a user came from the internet, then you have like first factor authentication and then second factor. If first factor fail, then what happened? Like that you just need to define everything, right? And if second factor fail and pass, then what happened? Same thing you are just giving for the intranet, right? If the user is from the company network, then in that case what authentication sources I need to give, and again in that case if fail happened, then what, and if pass happened, so one. So what basically? So it is just like a kind of tree structure. So first you are checking the condition, and on that basis you are just giving the result, right? Like true for that and false for that, right, like that. and again in that you're again going for like again checking that, right? So if it is false, then what? And again if that fails, then what happen, right? So it will just go in a tree structure, so it will look little complex, right? So in all the policy, like if we just open that, it will, you just confuse, right? And maybe it's tough for you to update also. Now like if there is a requirement came like, and you just need to do some update in some design, right? So you just need to, like for an example, you there is a requirement came that okay, that if user is coming from internet, then just give them first factor and second factor with some condition, right? Like that. Okay, so for that you just need to go to this policy, and then you need to update. So it looks to be little risky also, right? Because you are just trying to update the policy. So policy update, if it means like if you're making some mistake, then yeah, it is going to just make a major cause, right? Like your service can be interrupted and some other problem can come, right? So modifying policy is basically not recommended also, right? And this policy also works on the basis of priority level, right? Policy or anything, you can see that. So for example, if you have 4 policy here, so all have some priority, right? Like P1 priority, P2 priority, like that. So what if if you are putting P1 on the top, then basically it will just when the request will coming to the ping fed, it will go in that manner only, right? Like it will go for the first for the priority 1, then priority 2, then priority 3, then priority 4, like that. Okay, so what I'm saying, so you basically understand, right? Like this P1, P2 and all this looks little complex, right? If you just open the complete thing and if you're defining everything, right? Now what we can do, rather to update here, like we can just create a fragment, right? So fragment means, okay, so fragment means what we can do here, like we can just create a fragment for one kind of thing. For an example, like you have 2 authentication mechanism, right? One for the internal and one for the external. Okay, so like for internal you are just giving of HTML form to the user, okay, and for external you have like HTML form plus like second factor authentication, MFA, right? So what you can do, like fragment, under fragment, like you can just like you can create 2 fragment, right? Like under fragment I am saying that you can create 2 fragments, like one you can put internal authentication, and another you can put as an external authentication. Okay, so you have a complete picture of authentication defined here, and you have a complete picture of authentication defined here, right? Now what you can do, you can simply just like for an example, like yeah, now for an example, like if you have a policy P1, right, which basically checks for that whether user is from intranet or, like let's say like this, whether user is from intranet or internet, right? So in this case what you can do, you can simply put, right, like you're not supposed to just define everything here, right? You're not say that okay, for internet this adapter will come, now in this like true and false, if that is success then what, if that is failure then what, right? You're not supposed to define everything inside a policy. What you can do, you can simply just put a selector, right, in the policy, which basically check okay, user is from internet or user is from intranet, right? And based on that you have simply define a fragment. So here you define one fragment, like fragment for external authentication, and you have another fragment here for internal authentication. That means in the policy you are not doing much thing, right? You're simply just verifying, just checking the condition, and on that basis you are simply just giving a fragment. You define the fragment there, that's all, right? What is the advantage here? And that fragment you define under the fragment section, right? Here you define basically okay, that if this what exactly this fragment will do, right? This external fragment will, what external fragment will do, basically it will just you can define the authentication sources, right? That adapter and all those things you can define under this place. Now for an example, if you in future if there is anything needs to be modified, right? Like if there is a requirement came that okay, for in external part you just need to do some addition something, right? So you are not supposed to touch the policy, right? Your policy is fine, you just need to come to fragment, go to the external section and just update there, right? That's all. So in this case you can see your policy is very like safe, you are not touching that. Your policy is very easy to administer, right? You can simply just go and check that okay, so you have a very simple thing, you are simply checking the condition, and on that basis you are giving 2 fragments, one for the internal, one for the external. And that internal fragment you define under fragment section, that what exactly means of internal, that means you define some authentication source there, the adapter basically, okay. And again, if it fails, then what, you have some authentication sources, right? Not fail, basically if the user is from internet or intranet, sorry, company network, then you have some authentication sources, right? So you defined separately here. And the other advantage of fragment is you can see that how the policy becomes very easy, right? Otherwise it is very complex, right? You have a long tree structure, right? So because you are defining the authentication sources, you are defining the result case, right? So if fail and pass, then what happen? Again, if fail and pass, so what happens? So it is going for a long tree structure, right? And here by using fragment, you just make the things very easy in the policy, and you define separately in the fragment. Now another advantage is, one advantage I show you, another advantage I talk about that, okay, if you want to make some change, you can directly come here and make a change, no need to do touch the policy, right? The another advantage is, the third one I will say, that you can utilize this fragment in other policies also. That means like in the P2 you have some different case, right? You are checking some other condition, you have a scope based selector, right? For an example, scope based authentication selector, which basically look for the matching of the scope, right, scope parameter configured in PingFederate, and what it is coming in the OAuth request, right, in the authorization request. Based on that match, you have again defined the authentication sources and all the failure cases. So again, rather to do that, you can simply define again the fragment, and you can use the same fragment if required, right? You're not supposed to go and create new fragment also, because this fragment you define for the external default authentication sources, right? So if the application is not looking for any custom thing, then again you can use directly here, right, this fragment, right? So by using fragment, you understand that you are having three advantages. First, you are making your policy not complex, right? Because you are just checking the condition and then defining the fragment for internal authentication or external, like that. And second advantage is like if there is a need to make some change in the policy, like in the not policy, I'll say, if there is a change came from the company for some authentication mechanism, then you are not supposed to touch the policy. You can simply come to fragment and update that, right? It will automatically trigger. And the third advantage is you can reuse this, like you created one fragment and you are reusing this fragment in multiple policies, right? Like P1, P2, P3, like that. So these all three advantages making your life easier in PingFederate, right, while building the policy, while building the logics. So that's the advantage of fragment. So please create the fragment and define in the policy. Otherwise, like, you need to define everything under policy and it becomes a little complex. So fragment is just making things separating the things and making easy to administer the policies, right, in an easy way. Right, now let's quickly create few fragments. For us in our environment, we are not having much right now the use cases and scenario, but what we can do, we can just try to create one or two fragments, and then we can just look for the testing while we are doing the onboarding of the application. Okay, so let's jump to the live environment. Let's quickly create some fragments. So yeah, as we understand from the fragment is just a pattern, right, like for different kinds of authentication. So in our case, we have three types of authentication, right, like using composite adapter, using HTML form OpenDJ, and we have like with the SU simple username PCV, right, where we store the user ID and thing in the PingFederate itself, like I will show you. So yeah, simple username PCV, right? So yeah, I'll just go to authentication tab, I'll go to policies, and then I'll go to fragments. Let's quickly create some fragment. So I'll put as a name as fragment 1. I'll put as one second, put fragment 1 OpenDJ. Okay, and then I'll put input. So input here is basically you just need to define here like the input authentication policy contract, and the same for the output also, that basically calling members need to fulfill these attributes will be available for use throughout the policy. That means, yeah, you're basically, once you just do this configuration in the success part, you need to define the policy contract. I'll show you, like, for now let's choose the policy contract we created, the EPC, as an input output. And now let's quickly define so we're just going with the OpenDJ, right? So I'll just define the adapter directly here. Okay, so OpenDJ. Okay, now in this case it will come as a fail and success, right? So fail for I'll just mention as a done. Okay, and for success I'll just choose as a authentication policy contract, that is PF learning. Now I just need to do the contract mapping, means like while building the attribute APC, I just added some attribute, right? So now I just need to fulfill that values, right? So for that I just need to do the contract mapping. So I'm not adding any attribute sources and user lookup here. Let's go next. So these are all the attribute, if you remember, we have defined in the APC. Now choose source as a adapter. Just to define the source here. Now just define the values for the email as email. It basically just source as the adapter, right? So adapter basically connects to your directory server, right? If you remember that in the initial we discussed that adapter can connect to the PCB for verifying the credentials, and for bringing the information it can directly connect to data store, right? So like that here. So let's connect a subject also as a username and username as a username. Let's go next. I need to go for issuance criteria. Issuance criteria is basically doing for restriction part. Okay, so this is the our policy contract success, and here we have the policy. Okay, so this adapter is basically experiencing the user as an authentication, but once authentication complete, then we have the contract mapping, which basically fulfills the which basically create help in the generating of the token, and then we are like send back to the application. We can see that while we are just building some application, right? But for now, just understand that you have the this adapter, which is this authentication source. You have the HTML from OpenDJ, which is going to experience if we are going to use this fragment. Okay, now let me save, and I'll just go and create another one. Okay, I'll put here as a fragment 2 and SUPCB. Okay, simple username PCB. Let's put input as again same authentication policy contract, and now let's put here as a IDP adapter again, and let's choose as a simple username PCB. Now again the same case, fail and success. Fail for done, and then success, just go for the APC like policy contract. Sorry, yeah. Let's map do the contract mapping. Yeah, again, so just click on contract mapping, go for next. Now here you have the source as a SUPCB, right? So SUPCB will can able to bring the username, but not the it is not basically connecting to any directory server, right? It's inbuilt, so let's choose that only. Subject also, because yeah, it can bring the username. That's fine. So we can choose here as a username. Okay, for the SUPCB. Now click on next, and just save this. Yeah, done. Click on save. So we have 2 fragments created. Now let's go for third fragment, that is fragment 3, and let's put as a composite. Okay, we have another authentication source. So based on the authentication source, I'm just designing this fragment, and then we can define in the policy. I'll show you. Yeah, so let's choose here and put as a PF learning, output as a PF learning. Okay, and then you have the policy. Just define again here the composite one. Okay, and then again the same thing. Okay, failure for done, and for the success, let's click policy contract, and then just define do the contract mapping. Go to next, choose here as a composite adapter. Okay, composite adapter, and the composite adapter. Okay, and put a value as an email. Okay, that is the only value we have for the composite. Okay, next, and then just go to next, done. Okay, and then save it. So we have 3 types of authentication sources, and we defined under these fragments. Okay, now let's quickly jump to the policy, and let's see how we are going to create the policy using these fragments and other things. Yeah, let's do the cluster management also. Replicate, so push the changes to the engine node. Okay, yeah, this is done. Okay, let's jump to the authentication policy section. Yeah, thank you.